So hello, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for coming to our talk today. My name is Greg Findley, and I am one of the instructors and a co-course director for Terra's flagship program, Climate Change Learning for Action. Hello to our fellows and alumni who are joining us today. Thanks for being here. And welcome to anyone from the general public who's joining us. It's great to see you as well. If you are from outside of the Terra community, we hope you'll check us out by going to our website, terra.do. And also you could join the community by downloading our new app that you can find on one of the app stores for Apple or Google products. Now is also the perfect time to apply for our next cohort of Learning for Action, which starts in August. So the event that you have joined today is part of a slate of guest talks that we do during the cohort for each group, and it'll give you a taste of what you would expect to see if you were to sign up. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about our next guest, Goldman Environmental Prize winner, Linda Garcia. I'm very honored to have her here today. This is the keynote talk for the Vaquitas cohort. We name all of our cohorts after endangered animals, and we're on V at the moment. The Vaquitas cohort started just last week, so this is really what we call week one for them. And so as I mentioned, Linda was the Goldman Environmental Prize winner in 2019. She's an American environmental activist from originally from Washington, or did some of her activism in Washington. In 2013, she heard of plans for a Tesoro Savage oil terminal in the Port of Vancouver, and it was designed to be America's largest oil export terminal. After examining the company's records, she led a campaign against the project, successfully rallying public opposition. In January 2018, Governor Jay Inslee refused the necessary permits, putting an end to the project. Linda will talk about her journey into environmental campaigning and share her worldview on political organizing in the face of climate change. So welcome, Linda. We're honored to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for joining, no matter what time of the day or night or middle of the night it might be. It's quite early here, so my brain is foggy, my coffee is kicking in, and we'll try and see how well I can do with this. I was asked by Liam to begin by sharing my own personal theory for change. And change is a big word. It's a word that's thrown about, I don't know, pretty loosely now. And I think everybody has their own way of looking at it. For me, change can only happen when voices are lifted and heard and listened to. And mostly when humanity is put above profit. Which is a big piece of what I'll be talking about today. Good social policy bears much of the responsibility of a just environment in most countries. But those policies are typically shaped, written, implemented by those who are largely unaffected by most issues. Good policy is based upon feedback by those immediately impacted. Great policy is based upon putting into leadership those who are directly in the line of fire or have been directly impacted, allowing policy creation from a lived experience, something that people are steeped in rather than they've read about it or they've heard it second or third hand. So that's kind of my theory for change and how it can come about: listening to people, hearing with an understanding, and really good social policy. Again, Greg introduced me as far as the work that, or the campaign, I suppose, that resulted in me being awarded the Goldman Prize. I'm going to begin by sharing my story where that actually left off. I will be tapping into some of those things a little bit later, talking about organizing and discussing how that can happen. But what I'm sharing today, I believe it's imperative while working toward future climate goals, to have an understanding that situations like mine do happen even in the United States. And I'm prefacing all of this with, I'm sharing the details that I'm allowed to share due to security concerns ongoing. I can't share all of it, but I want people to have an understanding of what environmental work in today's world looks like. And just as the Tesoro campaign was winding down, I began a contracted position with a large organization whose main goal is to stop fossil fuel expansions all over the world. I was contracted to work here in North America, specifically the southeastern part of the United States. My work at the time was remote, before remote became a thing. And my role was to comb through policies of projects that were waiting for their DEIS approval, which I'm not sure if that's a worldwide or global term, but that's short for Draft Environmental Impact Statement. And if you can stop a project before it goes to DEIS and gets approval, then it doesn't even have a chance to step out of the draft area. It goes, it goes away, it disappears. It doesn't happen often. We were so fortunate in the Tesoro campaign to stop it right between those two kind of guidelines. While I was doing my contract work, I discovered some remarkably identical discrepancies in 3 entirely unrelated project policies, which to me was almost a certain guarantee that something wasn't quite right. I contacted my supervisor, who was based in a different country, and I was told to report it, but because I was contracted, I wasn't able to receive support from the company. So that was a little bit of an eye opener for me. It was a very, very big lesson learned. I was given a phone number to call with the information, and it took about 2 months for me to get my nerve up to actually call, because I knew what I was looking at. I knew that the ramifications could potentially be harmful, but I also knew that looking at these policies, if they were permitted to go through, it would have put some extraordinarily vulnerable and oppressed communities into such dire straits and immediate danger, ongoing issues with health and, potentially death. I can't sleep at night knowing that there are thousands of people who were going to be in jeopardy. So I finally did call. When I did, I was guaranteed anonymity. Within a few short months, I knew right away that the information about me had been leaked, and I had then become a target. A lot of things started happening, which I kind of pretended weren't happening. And I guess I'd say, because I'm in the United States, this stuff isn't supposed to happen here. This is supposed to be a safe environment for environmental activists or for any social injustice activist. We have rights. We can fall back on those. But the things that were happening were more covert. They're not as overt in targeting activists here as they are in other countries. So I had to really stop and step back and examine, what was going on. It started with threatening phone calls. The person on the end, always a man, on the other side, would tell me in very extreme detail what I was wearing, where I just came from, where I was going, who I knew, who I was walking with. Very, very uncomfortable. I should step out of here and say for just a second of that conversation and say that I didn't know at the time that all of the targeting began with my phone being cloned, which is, yes, actually a real thing. By doing that, they then had an exact replica of everything that was on my phone. And we all know our phones hold our entire lives nowadays. So my calendar, contacts, appointments, GPS, they had access to passwords for all of my sites, emails, banking, finances, work files, social media, all of that. They used intimidation tactics. My office was broken into and completely flipped multiple times. I had very important private files that were taken. They began contacting my closest friends and harassing them and telling them they should warn me of impending danger. Notes were left on the doors of their homes. They were followed in their vehicles. Um, I tried to pretend like this was a normal thing. I don't know how in my brain I thought it was normal, but I guess I was trying to convince myself that it was, so that I didn't feel like I was in any type of danger. I'm a single woman. So for me, going home at night, I have to tell myself what feels right so that I can get sleep and that I can continue doing my work. But then they started showing up at public meetings, just people that were sent and to harass me publicly, where I was testifying, or speaking, publicly speaking, and they began harassing me verbally and physically, trying to stop me from speaking. People would put themselves in between me and other people, and they would get shoved downstairs. And we had the police called on us multiple times, even though it wasn't really us that was doing anything. So it was very convoluted and flipped. I'm not used to this kind of thing at all. But when they started doing these things in public, it was, I guess, at that point that I realized I was in very big trouble, because now they were doing things openly in front of people, and no longer trying to covertly intimidate me. I began noticing more things happening around me, realized that I was now being surveilled. I was followed closely between home and work, to events, to social gatherings. I'd pull up to a friend's house and they'd say, "That car's been sitting over there for a couple of hours, occupants still inside." It's really uncomfortable trying to explain to your friends, when you're just going to hang out with them, why these things are happening to you. And it wasn't just uncomfortable, it just doesn't sound like something that would happen. So I was very, very cautious with who I shared, and the things that I did share. Um, I had 3 brand new vehicles within the course of 8 months, because things kept going terribly wrong with the vehicle. And at first I just thought, oh, it's a bad car, it's a lemon. But I guess, I don't know, new cars maybe not. But my electronic systems were tampered with. My GPS system was tampered with. My steering and speed went wonky. I was run off the road multiple times, sometimes with people in the car with me. So that was, I guess, kind of the next step for me. When security people did eventually get involved, they found GPS trackers located up underneath my car. Um, they found listening devices in both my apartment and my office. Several of my financial accounts, my retirement, all of those things were drained, so that I did not have financial backing or anything sound to help me with legal, or to get me some protection. My apartment was broken into multiple times. Little tiny things like artwork being pulled off the walls and left on the floor by the front door. Beer cans, wine bottles that I'd never seen before were left just in random spots to be found. My little Alexa unit that I no longer own was moved from the living room to the nightstand in my bedroom. All of these things were small intimidation tactics, kind of like a psychological warfare almost, to make me understand that somebody had been in my space, but nothing so big that it was so terrifying that I would just leave. I don't know why. I think the worst was, at one point I had a freshly decapitated squirrel. I had its head left hanging on my doorknob, with a note saying, "You're next." So yes, my neighbors knew at that point who I was, because my screaming was very loud. I had never experienced anything like that. Um, all of the imaginations that you can possibly think went through my brain at that point. so many other things, but the final straw was I was physically assaulted and left for dead along a river. And at that point, I was done. I left my job, I left my home, I left my family and my community, and went into hiding. And I did that with the help of two global organizations who knew exactly how to get me out of my situation as quickly as possible. It was important at that point that I started listening to other people. Upon investigation by the security team, it was discovered that everything, like I mentioned earlier, was tied back to the initial cloning of my phone, because the software that's necessary to do that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was determined then to be on a much larger scale than just simply a little go away and leave us alone scenario. And eventually through all of that, it was all tied back to a foreign country who had deep, deep financial ties and pockets and business interests with the fossil fuel companies that I had turned in a few years earlier. I feel strongly that it's important to acknowledge the emotional side of everything that happened to me. The entire time these things were occurring, my brain was telling me, this isn't real. You're imagining this. This does not happen here, not in the United States. I shared with very few people what was going on. Unfortunately, a few of them decided I was just being a typical hysterical woman and labeled me crazy. And that followed me and my mindset for a very long time. Even though many of them had actually witnessed much of this and been a participant. And a lot of the harassment and assault were caught on video, but I believed them. I believed them until I couldn't anymore. And so, when copious amounts of evidence were found on my phone and my computers, I just completely broke down. I was angry. I was angry at those who didn't believe me, but mostly at myself for not listening to my intuition and getting myself out before it nearly cost my own life. So that's the heavy part. That's the part of my story. I am still smiling. I want everybody to understand that I am very much alive and I am in safe areas now. And that's the most important piece of this. I want to jump to the organizational side of it. From what I've learned, organizing doesn't just mean putting together meetings. It means taking into account all of the things that matter and putting them into a box that can expand as people join you. So let's talk about that for a little bit. How to organize. The most important piece is to begin with conversations. I think there's a lot of vitriol circulating as far as social injustice, and environmental injustices are social injustices because they tend to affect those who are least likely to have the ability or capacity to stand up and say, no, stop. So uncover any biases or preconceived notions. We all have them. It's best to acknowledge and be willing to become educated by others whose lives are directly impacted, kind of going back to that social policy piece. Example, if you're fight fossil fuel companies along a pipeline that's located on indigenous land, you need to be sensitive. You need to have that sensitivity and be very culturally aware and try not to appropriate your own biases or hearsay into their lifestyle and experiences. They lived there. That's their life, their culture, their family, their community. They know what's best for them. So the simplest way to do that is just to be still and listen to what they're going through, listen to what they're asking for. By doing that, you'll gain tremendous insight into the significance of that particular fight. When I say fight, I can kind of intermingle that with the word campaign. I don't mean like, guns and battle fight. Well, I don't know. I mean battle. Yes, that's another word, but I just interchange it with that. So the next biggest step is to determine your fight, find a focus and narrow down the particulars. For example, my goals personally were protecting these oppressed and vulnerable communities, the unheard voices that who were at greatest risk from environmental disaster, chronic and severe illness, economic hardship, and unfortunately even death from some of these projects. Know your fight. It's always better to come from a personal standpoint. Ask yourself, how does this issue affect me? Again, environmental justice is social justice. It does affect everyone, but how does it affect you personally? Do you live in an impacted or potentially impacted area? Is your family or your cultural heritage located there? If not, that's okay. Everybody needs help. But you can begin by gathering stories from those who could or will be affected that might not be comfortable stepping up to the front lines, and decide how best to help them, how to best help tell those stories. Providing provable arguments that people are far more important than profit is only one side of any organized campaign. The most important piece is what I call the heart tug side. Personal stories that highlight potential negative impacts are critical. Many times I stood up and invited decision makers to my home that was located at ground zero to meet my neighbors and feel the close-knit ties within my community, to help make it deeply personable. They never accepted, they never showed up. They were a little too worried about being there, but the invitation was sent so that they could see what our capabilities were. So we've talked about determining and then knowing your fight, and now it's time to act. So the next step would be to fight your fight. And that can look like, there are a plethora of possibilities that this could look like. The most important part of any campaign is determining what your gift is, what you're most comfortable doing. Everybody has a gift. You just have to kind of tap into that. So what can these gifts look like? On the front lines, it can be organizing. If you're fantastic at organizing, or that's kind of your jam, you can do it on a large scale or a small scale. You can organize protests, you can organize small groups, speaking up at public medias, or public meetings, being a media rep, with speaking with political representatives. If you have contacts within policy think tanks, any organizational change makers, these are all people that need to be brought into campaigns so that they have an understanding of what's going on, and the resources that people in those positions can offer are endless and of absolute value. You can also talk to policymakers and help begin creating new policy from the ground up. I'm a firm believer that policy should never be created from the top down, because there's not the understanding there. Creating it almost like organizing as grassroots, creating it from grassroots. I believe that that's the best way to shape that and get them implemented. You don't have to be on the front lines if you're not comfortable in those positions, or you're worried about your safety, which we'll get to in a little bit. But look at some support roles. And I suppose it's important to know before talking about support roles, in any support role, the best way to know what to do is to ask first what's needed. People in any position in organizing have needs, but a lot of us tend to step in and say, you need this, you need this, you need this, when that might not be their top priority. don't prioritize somebody else's needs before you ask them what they are, and be specific. And most times people will let you know, this is what I need. This is where I need the most help. Or we, if it's a collective organizing, you can provide services. You can provide transportation for protesters. If you're a first responder, you can help with first aid assistance for people out on the front lines. If you're in the legal field, you can provide legal assistance, promotional assistance, designing a website, marketing, getting the word out there. These are all things that we discovered in our big campaign in trying to get word out and to get more people involved. It's the little things that we didn't think about, that started coming up over the years. You can make signs. We've all seen protests where people are holding up their signs. There's typically 4 or 5 people that just sit on a floor or at a table for 8 or 9 or 10 hours in one evening and get those signs made, and they pump them out quickly. So people that have that gift are invaluable. It helps get messaging across in a very visible way. Make lunches or meals for people on the front lines. Use your contacts to get volunteers, to get funders, to get general support. We all know about phone banking. Picking up the phone and calling people, informing community members of the issue at hand, getting them to meetings, helping pull together gatherings. One of the most important things you can do is vote. I don't put a whole lot of faith in the political system at this point, because I have seen kind of money trails and where that can lead to. So, educate yourself when you vote. Always vote, but educate yourself before, and go with the person that you feel has the values that most closely align with whatever your campaign is working on. It's the people that we vote in to office now are the folks who will be responsible for writing the next generation of the sustainable and green policies that we need to create a better environment for us. Find your own support team while you're doing this. Be prepared for the long haul. The Tesoro campaign that I worked on was just a little under 6 years. That was long. There were multiple times that I wanted to give up. My contract work was 3.5 years. It's long. It's not something that just snap of the finger and you're done and you have a great success. Give yourself little goals, because successes are not easy to come by. And when you're looking at the long term and you only have that one goal in mind, there's going to be some disappointment. So make sure that you're prepared, by creating small goals for the early wins, which will eventually lead up to that. And it's okay to stop and rest. Let people know, I can't do this right now. I will get back to it. Your support team will be there for you. I promise that. Once you're re-energized and recharged, you'll be better prepared to continue your fight in your campaign, if you take that rest. So coming back around to the safety part, this won't be as heavy, I promise. Just based on my own story and my own life, I believe that staying safe while organizing is ultimately the most important, and perhaps now in today's world, the most overlooked piece. So some of these suggestions are going to range from basic protection, common sense, things that we should be practicing on a daily basis, particularly when we're protesting or campaigning in any way. To outright survival or extreme cases, keeping in mind that the worst doesn't always happen. But if it does, it's best to be prepared with a strategy that will help you stay calm and help those around you on your team stay calm. So be prepared early. Understand that the larger the fight or campaign, the more upset that those in power that you're fighting against with copious amounts of funding, will become and will do whatever it takes to stop you. So in short, know who your opponent is, educate yourself, do the research, find out what they've done in the past. Rally and meet in numbers. It's much more difficult to harass and intimidate when you're not isolated. And it also goes back to that support piece too. When you're campaigning, you need as many people as you can get. While this isn't set in concrete, because reporting has been very sparse, because obviously people aren't talking about it as much as we should be. But in early statistical gathering, we're seeing now that women are frequently targeted, far more frequently targeted, and far less protected. I don't know the reasoning for that. I wish I did. That's one of my goals working right now, trying to figure out, why this is happening and how to help women stay safer. That doesn't mean that you need to have men in your circles or at your rallies. It means as a woman, you have to think smart and stay safe. And there are a whole lot of men out there who are right there willing to step up and say, no, this isn't okay. This can't happen. This is kind of toward all genders, look out for each other. Protect everybody's sacred spaces, protect your own sacred spaces, and listen to others if they have concerns or worries, or they're experiencing any type of safety issues. Believe them. If they say they're worried or scared, believe them and help them look into that. Always be prepared to be attacked verbally, physically, electronically. So the big three protections that I always talk about are devices, perimeter, and personal space. Devices, phone, computer. Your files can be accessed and corrupted or even erased. And that's terrible if you're trying to get the job done, or you have very protected information. You don't want that getting into the wrong hands. Download malware and software security protocols to protect your files. Use programs such as LastPass to double protect your passwords. Signal Messenger is the only way that I go now. It's two-way encrypted private messaging. You can set deleting messages, they just disappear. So those are integral for your communication needs. You need to make sure that you protect your messages that are going back, where you're going, what you're doing, what your strategies are, because they want to know. They want to know what your plans are. Your perimeter, that's your home, your car, your workspace, your areas that are most frequented. Set up security systems and cameras. Excuse me. Turn off your GPS locators. That was one of the biggest mistakes that I wished I had known in the beginning, and didn't realize that played such a big part. I was told take different routes to work and events or meeting spaces. It's far more difficult to follow somebody and follow their GPS. If you have a route set in your GPS and you take a different route, it's a little more complicated than for the other side. In your home, install deadbolts, extra locks if your doors and windows are vulnerable. These things are just basic common sense protections that, unfortunately, in today's environmental campaign, talking back, I suppose, and fighting the good fight, these things will help you become less vulnerable, feel a little safer, and protect you from any possibilities. Personal space, your body, your mindset, your will to fight. These are all things these are parts of your integrity that were definitely attacked for me. And that was difficult because I didn't know how to protect any of those at the time. Take self-defense classes, or better yet, ask someone to come in and teach them, to your volunteers, teach them how to protect themselves when they're out protesting or going to meetings and gatherings. I let people know the most important part, especially when you're out walking at night, carry a flashlight, and self-defense at all times, like pepper spray or taser where they're legal. That's a disclaimer. I recently discovered that that's not legal in every part. So if it's legal, carry it and learn how to use them quickly. I always have a can of bear spray on me. I mean, I hike all the time and I do come across bears, but I'm far less afraid of bears than I am of humans. So I have my bear spray with me. Meditate, read, journal your thoughts or listen to music to calm your mind before, after any big event or protest or meeting, anything that's going to help you clarify your thoughts and process what you're hearing and what you're going through. Do this with a friend. Physical exercise became imperative to me. I would be done with work and hit the running trail the second I got home, because that's the place that I could get out of my brain. But if you're gonna do that, anything that moves your body, do it in a place that's safe and populated, so there's less chance of being approached. Find reputable organizations, and I'm happy to give resources for those, whose sole mission is to protect activists. They can provide educational materials, all types of helpful resources, such as electronic privacy, how to protect it, local contacts, legal contacts, and in the most extreme situations, security for those being targeted physically. Always have an escape plan. That was the number one rule for me that I learned. And it's helpful because it helps calm my mind in situations where I might feel not as safe as I would have just being cocooned in a house or something. And with that escape plan, be prepared to implement it. Don't be afraid, just be prepared. And that piece of advice is mostly for frontline activists. But we all know situations nowadays particularly can devolve quickly. So being alert is key. If you suspect you're being targeted, trust your intuition, trust it. Don't hide it. Talk to other people you trust. If people don't listen, keep going, keep going, keep going. Speak up. Even if you have to shout about it, speak up until somebody takes you seriously. And then finally, if it's kind of the adage that's going around now in all of the protest circles, if you see something, say something. It's crucial. It's important to recognize if something feels amiss or wrong. Just tell somebody else. So in closing, I promise, the processes that I've spoken about today are probably leaning more toward a focus or a specific project or issue. I hope that you can take some of the information and use it to help organize a campaign or become a part of an organized campaign and help them evolve it a bit. But before moving into the Q&A, I think I'd like you to consider a few things when taking in the bigger picture. Over the past decade alone, we've definitely moved the needle from climate change and concern to full-blown climate crisis. We're closing in very quickly on a literal date of no return. That doesn't mean, though, that we lose hope. It means we work harder. How do we do that? One of the biggest ways that I can shout about all of the time is to engage our futures, which are the youth of the world. There are so many youth out there who have already stepped forward, and it's so commendable and admirable to watch them using their voices. But there are so many hundreds of thousands more who they just don't know where to begin. So we can help that. We can help them with that. We can encourage them to find roles in which they're comfortable, kind of like what I talked about earlier, frontline roles and support roles. There's something for everyone to use their specific gift. Today's youth have an abundance of very valid rage and fear-based stamina. But if we can help them learn how to funnel that properly, we can propel them into the roles of becoming the next leaders in the global climate discussions. That's so important. We need their voices. We need their strength. We need their energy, but we need those voices. And it really is truly our job to help them get out there. We should consider that both a responsibility and a privilege to share our own knowledge and the resources that we've collected with them, knowing that they may truly be the next greatest hope. Um, they can't fail with support and organization. They just can't fail. Okay, I think I'm done.
Wow, thank you, Linda, for sharing that story. Thank you for your incredible courage to take on this work. I do want to point out to everyone that not all activism is quite so dangerous. And so it's pretty terrifying to hear this part of it. I also love your point. There's a role for everyone. And that's one of our big messages here at Terra, which is no matter what your skill, no matter what you love to do, there's a role for you. You don't have to put yourself at any risk whatsoever to take action to work on climate change. And so please keep that in mind as we go forward. I would love to ask Linda, we didn't talk much about your campaign work in Washington that led to you winning this Goldman Prize. How did you manage to bring together so many diverse groups of people and different interests, from unions to business people to even the governor, to eventually stop this project? What did it take to bring those coalitions together?
A lot of talking. I started small. This project was supposed to be sited literally in my backyard at the Port of Vancouver. And so my neighborhood was part of the port property. And so it was a very diverse, economically challenged neighborhood. And most of us were blue collar, hardworking. We didn't have time to do anything other than raise our families and get out there and work. But being a part of the neighborhood association board of directors, we got information early that this project was coming in. And as soon as I heard about it, I knew that questions needed to be asked. So I started asking questions from commissioners and city council members and the governor and the governor's assistant. And I wasn't satisfied with the answers that I was getting. And I was getting a massive slicked up PR from the fossil fuel company. So I took all of that information that I had learned and started talking to people, going door to door and saying, hey, did you know that this is coming to our neighborhood? And then we started having meetings aside from our neighborhood meetings to gather more and more people. I was involved in the political scope at that point. So I started talking with local political representatives. And a lot of them were pro-labor. And so that's how we got the labor unions involved. One of the biggest labor unions that were supportive of our mission and our strategy were the longshore workers. That's their only job, is to work there at what we referred to as ground zero. So we got them involved. As soon as they became involved, they started talking to other labor representatives and unions. And it just kind of worked itself up that way. I talked to leaders of environmental nonprofit organizations, like the Sierra Club and, the Columbia Riverkeeper. The bigger the organization, the more volunteers and hands-on help we could get. And this was not just me talking at this point. This was so many volunteers going out and talking to other people. But the starting point was starting small and just talking to a few people here and there, and kind of like the ripple effect works. You tell one person, they tell 3, they tell 8, they tell 15. The more people that heard about it, the bigger the fight became. And then, the larger organizations started coming in and providing legal assistance and protective services. So it kind of a mushroom cloud. It just starts tiny and then just explodes into a bigger force.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. By the way, for all the fellows who are here, I did share a link to Slido. We're using Slido for the questions, and you can find that in the Slack channels announcing this event. And you can also upvote questions to have the questions that you really want to hear the answers to. So we do have a number of questions there, and I will go there. One question is, what kept you going despite intimidation and harassment? How did you find the courage? And I would even add to that, what was your motivation to get started in all of this? What led you to really want to take action?
The second question first, what led me to start? I was kind of born a tree hugger. I was born on Earth Day. So it's kind of a running joke in my family and friend circle that I've always been a tree hugger. I've always, my personal belief is that we were handed this gift of our earth, and like little kids at Christmas, we tore off the wrapping and the ribbons and made it all messy and ugly, and it's our responsibility to try and figure out how to fix it and make it as pretty as possible again. And I know that that's a really terrible analogy, but there's been a lot of distraction and we've allowed that to happen. And so for me, my motivation is passing down to my children and my grandchildren and their children something that is sustainable and something that is livable by all species, not just the human species. So I've always been drawn and connected to nature. Keeping me going were a couple of things. I always had my kids in the back of my mind. This is what I'm fighting for. This is how I'm doing it. To escape, I would just head out to the mountains and backpack and hike and get away for days because that's what sustained me. That's what kept my mind ready to keep fighting. The biggest thing is in my contract work anyway, was the idea that thousands of people were at risk and they did not even know it. And I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to say, okay, I'm going to protect my own life and sorry about the rest of the thousands of you. You're on your own. I can't do that. That's not what helps me sleep at night. That's not what makes me feel good about a continued future for us. So I guess just the idea that, there are so many innocent and vulnerable, marginalized people who aren't given a second thought or out there unknowingly being targeted by these companies that were going to destroy their lives. So that's kind of what kept me going.
Well, thanks for keeping going. We need more people like you, and really appreciate what you've done there. We have a specific question about the Washington oil terminal and what ultimately persuaded Governor Inslee to deny the permits. Was it political pressure by a number of people, or was it criticism of the environmental impact statement that he thought wouldn't hold up in a legal challenge? And if you wouldn't mind, how much did climate change play in this decision, or what impact did it have on this decision?
It had a tremendous impact on the fight itself because there are always going to be the deniers. And so it was a constant battle trying to get them to see our side. I hate to say our side versus their side, but that's literally what it boiled down to. We have in Washington a very progressive governor at the time right now, and then still Governor Inslee. And it took a lot of years and a lot of research, a lot of studies from multiple agencies and organizations. The big challenge was trying to get people to understand that the moment this project went online, 24/7, it would be emitting toxins into the air that are capable of killing people, like it proven. And so those reports and statistics were given to the governor. The studies that were done as part of the policy leading into the DEIS and then the eventual EIS studies for that were all given to him. I'm sure that we were not allowed to have contact with him during the entire time. So that was difficult, but we had to hold that hope that he would seriously look at what the potential impact on not just the communities, but the region at large. A little wall doesn't come down around a neighborhood and say, okay, all of the bad things are going to stay right in here. At the same time, we were seeing accidents over the course of those years. We were seeing accidents happening that would be very similar to what could potentially happen where this project would have been sited. So can't really hide that from him. He saw all of those things. The final say, I guess, or the final decision was really based upon all of those studies and the fact that the river, the Columbia River, one of the biggest in the country, runs right there, and the potential for disastrous impact, particularly upon our indigenous peoples here, would have been devastating. Any accident would have devastated the economy, lifestyles, everything of the entire region, but particularly them. So it was kind of a mishmash. It was a little bit of everything, and he put a lot of thought into it, thankfully, and came to his conclusion.
A number of people have asked questions about advice on how to protect yourself or what you might recommend for people in countries besides the United States where activists potentially, violence and intimidation is even more common. Do you have any advice for those folks and for ways to protect yourself as an activist? You have talked about some of this already, but we'd love to hear a bit more.
Yeah, there are multiple large-scale NGOs across the globe that have resources, from funding to safe houses to transportation to actual physical security. And so I can send you some of those resources, and then you can share them if you'd like. But in foreign countries, that's where I would highly recommend going to. In my own country, in the United States, I don't know who to trust anymore. If I were in a different country, I definitely would not know who to trust. You don't know where the support, the financial support, the legal support, all of that for the companies that are trying to stop activists is coming from. So that's kind of why I recommend, if it's starting to get really extreme and intense and severe, go seek help through those resources from those larger NGOs. They've been here and done that, and they've been protecting activists for decades. They're doing more and more work now as things are getting a little more extreme. And many of them are working in that environmental justice field now.
Yeah, thanks. We'd love it if you'd share some of those resources after the talk. That'd be fantastic.
Sure.
And then I will share those on the Slack channels. Another question here is, I don't know if you heard in the UK, I believe it was yesterday, some protesters in an art museum glued themselves to 200-year-old art with super glue, and they actually didn't damage the art. They put their hands against the frames that the art was held by. The question is, what do you think of that, and how does being arrested affect campaigns?
That's a tough one. My own personal opinion, I'm wavering. I mean, that's history. And, destroying history for the sake of visibility is not my cup of tea. I don't know about the frames. Or the frames part of history? There's so many questions that I have in my mind about that. So it's kind of hard to speak to that particular incident. I hadn't heard of that. But overall it was visibility, and I'm not sure what they were protesting. When you put yourself out there, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I have a lot of friends who are activists that say my number one bucket list is to get thrown in jail. So it's a goal, I guess. Being arrested for protesting is almost a it's almost kind of, I don't know, a hero thing, I think. It does create much needed visibility, and it's that whole heart tug thing that I was talking about when you're sharing your personal stories. If there's somebody out there that is trying to destroy the integrity of what you firmly believe in, then you're going to do whatever it takes. You're going to do everything in your power to make sure that that doesn't happen. If that means chaining yourself to a tree, or putting yourself down on the railroad tracks and not letting yourself be removed, or getting in the faces of people to try and get them to hear you, and putting signs out there, and all of those things. I think it's important that we have the ability to do that. I think activists are being arrested now. I know activists are being arrested now for reasons that aren't even valid. And so, if that's what it takes, then I was out there every day putting myself on the line, and I not have given one less care had I been arrested and put into jail, because I knew that my activist friends had legal assistance that would have been right there. And we've all been taught, write your attorney's name on the back of your hand in Sharpie pen, and write your numbers on your contact numbers on this side with a Sharpie pen. You prepare when you go out to do these things. And so I think that it's important to see the necessity of getting out there and protesting, but I also think at the same time, you're taking yourself off of the front line when you put yourself in that position. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, to be honest.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for your courage and for being here to share your experience with us. Thank all of you folks for coming today. We are at the hour, and so I'm going to wind up this event. And really, thank you so much for just all you're doing, and for putting other people above yourself, and for other people in the planet above yourself. It's so important, and such an inspiration to hear this story. So thank you so much for that. And again, everyone, thanks for being here. We appreciate you joining us today. If you're a current fellow, I'm sure we'll talk about this in our lab groups next week. So bring your questions and thoughts and ideas to share with your instructor and the other fellows. And thanks everyone for joining our Tarot Talk today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Stay well. We need you.
Thank you.